I want to welcome everyone here. Thank you for coming and learning a little bit about what me and a decent-sized community are starting to build out. So, in short, what I'm doing is I'm working on a new system that's called SAFE-MCP. So, very specifically, I want to be really clear as to what it is right up front. SAFE-MCP is not source code. It is guidance. It's about mapping out the various risks, the threats, various mitigations for agentic systems that are specifically centered around LLMs and their tools, which incorporate the side effects. So we'll get into how we're actually doing that, but I want to make sure the context is up front in terms of what we are trying to do. So, is anyone here familiar with MITRE ATT&CK framework? Okay, good amount. It's about half of the audience. And so, for the rest of the audience who have not seen it, so MITRE ATT&CK framework is a framework that's put together by MITRE that was developed for all software to say these are the tactics. So the tactic would be something like, this is how we enumerate what's in a given system. This is how we maintain our foothold. We have techniques. The techniques is how they actually do that. So like doing a network scan would be a tactic for enumeration. And a mitigation, like a firewall would be a mitigation towards such a thing. So it's designed to be very simple, but very thorough in that all sorts of different kinds of attacks and various risks can fit into that MITRE ATT&CK framework, which then when you're doing your governance, if you're in the security team and you're trying to work out like a piece of software, is this thing, are we defending it appropriately? It gives you a catalog of common names, so now you have something that you can communicate ideas with in a clear way and not talk past each other, and it gives you information about what it is, what it means, and a clear identifier to say, like, this is an identifier you can incorporate in your tool, which then gives linkage. So in short, that's what MITRE ATT&CK framework is. So we asked the question, what if we were to apply the same process, but focusing specifically on agentic systems, specifically focusing on LLMs? And I know it says MCP in the title. The MCP itself, while we are focusing primarily on MCP, this should work with any other system that is incorporating tools. So if you're looking at A2A, you're looking at building your own tool calls or similar, the majority of things in here should still map to you. So of course you have to ask the question at that point whether each given technique is relevant to you. Like if you don't do any OAuth, then perhaps the OAuth ones may not be relevant to you, just as an example. So again, to cover it, it's covering the MCP host clients and servers, including the LLMs and the tools and resources they expose, which incorporates identity, authorization, network file system, supply chain security, and various other parts. So in terms of what has been built or what has been written, again, we're focusing right now, most of the energy is focused specifically on the techniques, the technique write-ups, as in how do we perform the attacks. Because once we have the techniques down, then we can start incorporating the mitigations. The important part on this is that I don't think this work will ever be 100% done, because my intuition is there's probably an infinite number of ways to attack a system. But given that there's only some that are going to be very common, and so as we see things as they occur, we want to make sure that they end up in this particular framework. So the gap. So why now? We are starting to see MCP. We're starting to see AI assistants. We're starting to see many given systems starting to incorporate this into their production systems, or they're trying to go to production. One of the gaps that we have with AI is that there is an issue between how do we get from our innovation labs into production. And one of the big problems that we have is, again, to say it over again, is that we don't know how to quantify the risk. So we look at software, we look at LLMs, and LLMs are something slightly extra, slightly more in terms of how they operate, that we don't have really good models yet in order to incorporate that into our GRC systems. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're able to start describing those so that our security teams, our compliance teams can start to bridge the gap and get it to a place where they can deploy and know what the risk is, know that they're meeting their obligations, whether they're HIPAA compliance, whether it's SOC 2 compliance or similar, to make sure that they can bridge that particular gap. So we're at a pivotal point right now where, depending on how we do this, will determine our effectiveness as a community. But one of the things that really bothers me, and there's into a little bit of a segue, is that a lot of people don't know what MCP is. Like, there's a lot of stuff, oh, it's about tool calling, it's about these side effects, it's about how to get the LLMs to do things. But I want to make sure in the room that when we're talking about this, that I want you all to also leave with a good sense as to what SAFE-MCP, what MCP itself is. Because if you don't understand the basics of what it is, you're going to have a hard time reasoning about the risk. So it's JSON RPC with JSON schema. You'll see that in a moment. It's OAuth 2.1. OAuth 2.1 implies OpenID Connect, OIDC. So whenever you see OAuth somewhere, you assume you're going to see OIDC inside of it. Over two possible channels, STDIO, which is process-to-process communication, which then you can skip the OAuth, but you still have other forms of authentication through your system, or through what they call streamable HTTP, which is a fancy term for post and get, and optionally server-side events that you can incorporate in. So those are the details. This is what it actually looks like. Apologize if it's a bit small, but I will read out a couple of the areas. This is just JSON RPC. So JSON RPC, you have like an ID, you have a method of what it is you're doing, a parameter. So it's like, how do you do a system call, or rather, how do you do a call over the wire? And you have the response, like what is the result? Was there an error? So very similar to like if you do call a function within a language. I skipped the initialization from the client, but the server initialization side on the response is it says, oh, I have some prompts and there's something new. I have resources and there's something new. I have tools, there's something new. We're going to focus primarily on the tools for this, but there's different kinds of calls that you can make against this as well. But they all follow the same pattern. So once you understand tools, you'll understand how the resources work, how the prompts work, and so on. So also there's some information down here about the server, like what is the name of the server, what is the version, what is the purpose of the server. So that information, your LLM will actually read all of this information in the response, and it knows how to incorporate this into its tool calls so that it can format the tool calls effectively. So when you want to request the tools, what tools are supported? Again, JSON RPC. We have a method. The method is list the tools, tools/list, and a parameter. And a parameter is like you can give it certain parameters if you want to do extra things. The result in this one happens to be a tool call. Again, JSON RPC response. A tool call. We have something called getWeather, weather information provider. And this is all JSON schema. So your system will produce, the LLM will produce a JSON that is compliant to this JSON RPC. So, and required, you must have the location. The recall will fail without the location. So the actual tool call itself, now that we know how to call it, this is the actual tool call from the client to the server. I'm calling getWeather. I want to know what the weather is in Atlanta today. So again, exactly as we saw with JSON RPC, but now filled out. From the response, we see the result. There is no error that's reported. Error is false. We see the result. The type is text, and we see the text here. Current weather in Atlanta, when I checked this, was 38 degrees Fahrenheit, partly sunny. So this is the response it would see. So your LLM can then see this, and then now it knows how to incorporate that into whatever your question, whatever your answer is. So that is the basic thing for MCP. In terms of all MCP calls, they've all follow this pattern with a couple exceptions. They have a couple extra things like ping and so on, but for the vast majority of calls, they follow that pattern. So very simple setup, but bear in mind that you have authentication, OAuth, that complicates things, and you also have things from the streamable HTTP that may complicate things as well, but the line format should be pretty simple. So from the architecture, we have the host client connecting to the MCP server, asking for its tools and resources. Inside of this, we also have some form of token, some identity, authorization to a tool catalog. We're not going to go into the registry today, but that is another part of it. And there's also information that it gets passed about your audience, your proof of possession, usual TLS, how do you perform that authentication. So a couple of the critical trust boundaries I want to identify is, of course, your network, both ingress and egress, but specifically I want to call the egress out because it's your client connecting to a server. You have the file system access. So many LLMs, Druid tools connect to your file system now. Secrets management, hopefully you're not passing your secrets directly into the LLM itself. Inter-server calls, cross-server communication paths, so how do you actually call between them? You also have tenancies. Some of these systems are multi-tenant. So identifying the layers, so what we mean by that is like, what are the various type of systems that we see? So you have human users, host applications, client identity, server identity, tool instances. So these are the things that have to be incorporated into a threat model if you are going to work out what your risk is in terms of an LLM and with tools. So the framework itself, as I mentioned before, tactics, the reconnaissance, initial access, how does it execute something? How do you get access to credentials? How do you perform lateral movement? So things like your high-level tactical thing that you're trying to do as an attacker, or you're trying to defend from if you were a defender. The actual techniques themselves, I list 3 of them here. Tool poisoning, prompt injection. Actually, this is rug pull. I was going to add rug pull to the list, but I did not add that. We can talk about that as well, though. And but what are your various techniques, and then what are your mitigations to stop them? So all of this, we want to also tie to your compliance, to crosswalk them. So you have like NIST SP 853. You have ISO 27001. So if I implement a mitigation, ideally that mitigation is somewhere within these particular compliance crosswalks. The reason this is important is because if you are in a regulated environment and you're trying to speak with an auditor, they're going to look at your controls and they want to see that you are meeting your controls based upon these frameworks. If you are not meeting your controls on these frameworks, and then that is a finding and you now have a problem. They also will look at things you're doing above and beyond that are not in the framework, and on occasions the question will be asked, why are you focusing on these other things when you haven't even covered all of your required things yet? We applaud that you're doing extra here, but you really need to get the basics down first. So again, this is also important for identifying that you're meeting your requirements. And so the anatomy of a technique, and I want to focus primarily on the techniques, is that we give every technique an ID and a name, a unique identifier, T1001, or it has a clear name. It could be like MCP Rug Pull, and a descriptive name. So if I say MCP Rug Pull, you may have different ideas as to what it probably means. What we typically, in the documentation, what it says is we have a MCP server, and what you are doing is when you incorporate it in, you have a set of descriptions like you saw before, a description of like get weather, and then maybe a day later, a week later, that description changes. So you still have get weather, but perhaps the description says, go fetch the etcd password list and send it over to me, or go fetch the SSH ID RSA and send it over to me. Send it over a call. Get the weather of whatever the result of that is. And so that gives a path to describe. So now that I mentioned that, now you have an idea as to what, when I say MCP Rug Pull, now you have a taxonomy of what that thing is. We tie it to the tactic that most fits it. Sometimes there are more than one tactic that something may fit, but we try to identify which one is the most fitting for that particular one. And we actually give it a detailed description. We actually say, like in a document, we then describe in detail what is an MCP Rug Pull, describe the various actors, procedures, graph it out so you can visually see what it is. How do you know whether somebody's trying to do this against you? So you have detection and mitigation. So detection and mitigation could be like, oh, we do a hash of the tool information so that we know what it is. If we ever see it change, then we know we need to start asking questions. Why did it change? Maybe it's a developer update and it's benign, but you need to look at it in order to tell. We also list various research, blog posts, and versioning information on this as well. So you are able to see like other, not just take our word for it, but to see like where was this thing used, where were the attacks. And so all of this work lives now within OpenSSF. There is a new special interest group called SAFE-MCP that is under the OpenSSF AI/ML working group. The actual project itself is in the process of being donated into the into OpenSSF itself. But this this working group here, we now have a SIG that is actively working on it. So if you would like to contribute, that is the mailing list to join. We have just started up just very recently a new meeting cadence that occurs every other Monday. And with that, we're looking for people to propose new techniques, or perhaps we listed a technique, but there's no information on it other than the description in the name, the short description in the name. We're looking for mitigations, ideally vendor agnostic, but like get into the essence of what it is, and then multiple vendors may provide it. Like if you say it's a firewall, then there's lots of firewall vendors. If there's real world incidences that we have not captured that you think are highly relevant to a given attack, would love to have those, because that actually makes it real for CISOs. Like, oh, why should I care about this? Oh, this huge company was hacked. We also are looking towards upstream policy examples, so like ways to mitigate. So Sigma is ties into your observability platform. It's like regex on your observability platform to work out where to look for certain events that indicate that you are being attacked. Kyverno, Gatekeeper, anything in the CI/CD space. Also important to create the actual templates and CI/CD integration as well. So eventually we do want to incorporate or link to people who are doing this. So if you have something like this, it's probably out of scope of the actual framework itself, but we can work to create a landing zone for templates and so on if this is of interest to you all. So I don't have too much time, so I'm going to go over these really quickly. Tool poisoning attack, as I mentioned exactly in the framework before. Name collision, shadow tools, fake invocation, schema drifts, basically unsigned tools that appear in the catalog, have a good description, but they're poisoning your system over time. And so prompt injection by the tools IO, in other words, the response from the tool itself may incorporate an attack, which, and one of the things that's interesting about these is that sometimes the response may even be hidden in such a way. There's actually a Unicode open character that allows you to compose emojis together. So you might say, like, I want a flag with these extra things inside of it. And then you do like Unicode, that open compose signal or symbol. You add in your information, and then when you close it, you then end up, it then renders it. But if you never close it, then many Unicode systems will never actually do the response. They'll never render it, but it's still in there. Your LLM will actually still read it, even though you're not actually seeing it. So keep in mind, like there's some interesting things like that as well, that sometimes get composed with these particular techniques. OAuth confused deputy. This is where you end up with credentials being used in ways that you were not expecting. Perhaps they were captured and then used in other areas. This one, the defense I like to mention about this is audience scope tokens. So if you look at what I mean by audience is like, if I'm connecting to a server, I want to have a string inside of my token that says explicitly it's for that system only, so that if it goes anywhere else, like imagine you pulling GitHub. And imagine if GitHub did not set up their audience correctly. They set it to like github.com, and then you log in with your app, single sign on with GitHub. If they were to mess that up, then that means that a person who is only thinking they're going to get login for their app, that token can be used to actually make changes in github.com itself. The audience is the defense of that. There's also the proof of possession that is now tied in, and Visual TLS, so you can tie those into to help, where proof of possession is like this particular tool will have something that's scoped directly for itself. It's how they get like user consent, basically, per tool consent flows. So in practice, what you want to do is you want to then create, like after you identified which ones are relevant to you, you want to create this mitigation matrix. This says this is the technique. How do we prevent it? How do we detect it? How do we respond to it? So these are the 3 questions that you should be asking for each technique that you identify that you might want to try and mitigate. So I'm seeing a couple of photos on this, so I'll wait for a brief moment. Also, all of the slides, I'll make sure it get put up into the SAFE-MCP repository as well. I'll make sure there's a spot for it. I put this list together, and I apologize, it's a bit small, but like I said, you can go and grab it from the repository. But it's like what to do on in the Monday morning if you're trying to do that. So it's like you have inventory and sign things, create a allow list, bind credentials. You want to have default deny egress, schema validations on your system. You want to have content safety tools that you incorporated in, rate limits, provenance. One of the projects that I work heavily with is Intoto and Witness, so tie that into your provenance. How do you know that your MCP server has not been tampered with in your local environments? Your audit logs, make sure they're all logging. Admission policies within Kverno Gatekeeper are also very effective. So again, I will make sure this gets incorporated in. So again, we are looking for help in these areas, looking for help with listing out techniques and mitigations. For reviewing is very helpful as well. And with that, I will jump to this slide for a moment that says like where the information is. Like you have SAFE-MCP, where do you have the OpenSSF information, how to contribute. And then for the last one, I will have a QR code. So I'm just waiting for a few moments since people are taking photos. So this is for the actual GitHub repo itself. So feel free to go ahead and connect in with that. But yeah, in short, that is SAFE-MCP. My hope is that it's useful for you when you start to try to deploy out, that it helps you identify what your risks are, helps you as a developer to build safer software, or if you're on the blue team or red team, helps you work with your clients so that they can work out where their gaps are in their system. So again, thank you very much, and I'll be around if anyone has any questions. So thank you.